The Springside Action Committee welcomes you to Springside Farm in historic High Bridge, New Jersey. This isolated and nearly forgotten historic farmstead is located on Springside Lane and straddles the border of neighboring Clinton Township at the eastern portion of the borough limits. Springside Farm is comprised of 90 acres of some of the most beautiful and picturesque acres in High Bridge. County historian Stephanie Stevens once called Springside Farm the most historically significant Germanic farmstead in all of Hunterdon County. Historic maps of the borough from the mid-18th century graphically illustrate a house located on the current site of Springside Farm and owned by the Apgar family, and near a house owned by a Lance that was over the rise towards Cokesbury. Both the Apgar and Lance families were Palatine Germans, like the Vaughts, which may explain why Springside Farmhouse and the historic Vaught House in Clinton Township are very similar in size and construction. However, history also records that the main house was constructed sometime in the mid-1700s by Archibald Taylor on the Old Road, now known as Nassau Road. Archibald was the son of Robert Taylor, who immigrated from Ireland in the 1750s. More research is needed to determine who constructed the stone house, although we are certain that Archibald did occupy Springside in the late 18th century. Starting with Robert Taylor, 5 generations of the Taylor family would come to operate and manage the nearby Taylor Iron and Steel Company in High Bridge, which eventually became Taylor Wharton Iron and Steel Company. During this time in history, Springside was an agricultural use farm with fruit and vegetable fields, orchards, and possibly oxen and cattle. Produce grown on site was sold to the Taylor Iron and Steel Company, and oxen raised at the farm were also used at the ironworks. In the late 19th and early 20th century, Springside was owned by Knox Taylor, descendant of Robert Taylor and president of the Taylor Iron and Steel Company, along with his wife Lucy. During this time in history, the farm was expanded with an addition made to the main house, the construction of a horse barn, a dairy barn, and a trademark spring house and pond. The farm also sponsored the Zellman family, who were immigrants from Germany and who came to live and work on the farm. The last major use of the property was a dairy farm, one of 3 dairy farms in the borough, and also a horse farm. Lucy Taylor is also known to have raised a prize thoroughbred horse on the farm. In 1950, after nearly 200 years of being in the Taylor family, the farm was sold by Lucy Taylor and transferred into other private hands for the next 50 years. In the late 1990s, the borough began talks with the owners of Springside to purchase the farm and make it a permanent open space. After years of negotiations, Springside was jointly purchased in 2002 between High Bridge Borough and Clinton Township, with funding through Green Acres and grants through the County Cultural and Heritage Commission. 29.7 of the total acres are now owned by High Bridge and include all of the historic structures of the farmstead. At the time of purchase, the main farmhouse was rented and occupied, and several of the farm structures were leased out for horse boarding. Although the property was preserved, the historic structures remained vacant since its purchase, with no adaptive reuse or preservation efforts implemented. For the next 18 years, the farm became desolate and virtually forgotten, with all the structures suffering years of neglect. The historic main house tragically suffering substantial damage from a leaking roof and broken windows. The once intact interior started to crumble and decay. The farm became derelict because of a lack of an overall sustainable plan and vision. All that changed in 2020. Undeterred by the daunting tasks that lie ahead, Councilwoman Natalie Ferry and Michael Gronsky, who is an architect and president of the local history-based nonprofit organization, the Union Forge Heritage Association, as well as Springside Committee members Mia Baldwin from the Highbridge Environmental Committee and environmental interpreter, and Lynn Copeland, community garden planner and class instructor. This team saw the value in saving Springside Farm and began the process of preparing a systemic stabilization and adaptive reuse plan for the property. The agricultural buildings of the property include the carriage barn, horse barn, dairy barn, and the ruins of the general barn structure. The carriage barn is the second oldest structure on site, dating to the late 18th century, and is bank structure built of local stone, heavy rough-cut tree trunks, and hewn timbers. The siding is both plank and clapboard, and the roofing is tin. The wagon house exemplifies the early example of the property's 18th, 19th, and 20th century agricultural use. The structure is in remarkably stable condition, but in need of siding and roof repairs. The adaptive reuse of this structure would be to display historic agricultural farm equipment such as wagons and other items. The horse barn is the third oldest structure on site and dates to the late 19th century. The framing timbers are sawn lumber rather than hand-hewn and includes gable roof ends with shake siding suggesting the early Victorian themes. The foundation is stone and the second story used as a hayloft. The structure is in relatively stable condition, but in need of immediate roofing repairs to address recent tin roof damage. The structure is connected to the general barn foundation and forms the westerly side of the barnyard. As the structure is newer in comparison to the oldest site structures, its reuse could be linked to the proposed environmental uses of the site. The general barn structure has been reduced to the stone foundation, with all the massive upper-level oak timbers collapsed and deteriorated beyond salvage. The structure dates to the mid-19th century and is a stone bank foundation that is in stable condition. Old photographs show the barn was over 2 stories in height and likely a hay barn. As the reconstruction of this barn is beyond reasonable scope, the idea is to cap the stone foundation walls and leave it as a ruin and a testament to the progression of buildings on site. The newest and last structure to be built is the massive dairy barn, built in the 1920s. The structure is gambrel roof built of dimensional lumber and first-floor stone walls. This structure is connected to the general barn to the west and serves as the eastern leg of the U-shaped barnyard. Although not specifically historic, the dairy barn tells an important story of the evolutionary history of the property to a predominantly dairy industry. Due to neglect, the structure is in varying states of decay, and without immediate remediation, the roof will continue to deteriorate beyond any reasonable repair. This structure would be ideally used for large gatherings for on-site events. The focal point structures of the site are the main house and the spring house. The main house dates to the mid-18th century and is of stone and hand-hewn timbers. The house is a bank house with a front facade facing south with 2 main living levels and a sizable attic. The past 10 years has not been kind to this 270-year-old structure. Neglect has allowed the roof to deteriorate to the point of severe decay and roof openings allowing the elements to infiltrate the structure, causing serious finish and some structural damage to the southern side of the structure. The unaffected sections of the house are still intact, with original plaster, wide plank flooring, wainscoting, recessed decorative wall panels, and a massive walk-in cook fireplace that is in stable condition and very restorable. An addition to the house was made sometime in the early 19th century, which is also in a state of deterioration. The adjacent spring house was constructed in the late 19th century and is stable with a new roof construction. The restored main house would become the welcoming center to the property and the focal point of the property and the borough's agricultural history. The expansive property itself is envisioned to become an environmentally inclusive area with pollinator meadows, orchards, community gardens, and an environmental learning center. Phase 1 of the Springside Action Plan includes stabilization of the main house, site structure inventory with detailed drawings, and the development of a full action plan to assist in fundraising activities. Phase 1 has already been implemented with the tarping of the main house roof. Although a temporary measure, this will ensure the house does not suffer any further water damage in the short term until funding can be secured for a new roof. Costs will be substantial because roofing finishes as well as some structural reframing will be required. The committee's goals are ambitious, but our volunteer base has started strong and is growing. The committee is currently seeking donations and in-kind donations for the main house roof replacement and for on-site debris removal. If you would like to volunteer or donate to this project, you can send a check made out to the Highbridge Borough Springside Committee, and please address the envelope as follows. Attention Councilwoman Natalie Ferry, Highbridge Borough, 97 West Main Street, Highbridge, New Jersey, 08829. To make a donation online, go to the Highbridge website at highbridge.org, scroll down to the Pay Online box, then click the Register or Sponsor Annual Event link. At the Select Payment Item pull-down, select number 2, Donation, Springside Farm. Then fill in your name, your donation amount, and all the additional data requested below, and then click Add Item. If you have any questions, please email Michael Gronsky at springsidecommittee@gmail.com or Natalie Ferry at nferry@highbridge.org.